friends, today we're going to read Jean-Jacques and Frida Go to the Iron Market by Elizabeth Turnbull. So the Iron Market is in the capital of Haiti, which is Port-au-Prince. Let me tell you a little bit of facts about the Iron Market. So the Iron Market of Haiti has a very special history. The market was built in the nation's capital, Port-au-Prince, in 1891. Since then, it has served as a very important landmark and symbol for the Haitian people. But how it arrived in Haiti is, to this day, a great story in itself. The Iron Market was built in pieces in France in 1889. It was intended to go to Egypt to become a railroad station in Cairo. The sale to Egypt did not go through, so Haiti's president purchased it to help modernize Port-au-Prince. The market today is known as the Marché Hippolyte and as the Marché Anba, but more commonly and fondly known as the Marché. During the great earthquake of 2010, the Iron Market was badly damaged. The international community rallied to help save the market and rebuild it. The new market is stronger and resistant to hurricanes and earthquakes. It even has solar panels. So that was interesting. Now let's read our story, Jean-Jacques and Frida Go to the Iron Market. As a colorful tap-tap stopped in front of the red and green Iron Market in downtown Port-au-Prince, Jean-Jacques and his cousin Frida felt their eyes grow big with wonder. "Marin, look!" they exclaimed together, turning to their godmother, Mrs. Pierre. She was taking them on their very first adventure to the famous market. "It's so big," Jean-Jacques said. "It's so beautiful," Frida responded, looking at the clock tower standing tall in front of them. "I've never seen anything like it." Mrs. Pierre spotted a man selling frescoes near the entrance to the market. "The tap-tap ride was long and dusty," she said. "I think I know just what we need to refresh ourselves." Jean-Jacques followed his godmother's gaze. "Frescoes!" he exclaimed. The fresco man carefully shaved off ice and packed it in a little paper cone for the children. "What flavor syrup do you want on top?" he asked them, smiling. "I'd like cherry, please," Freda said. "I'd like mint," Jean-Jacques responded. The honeybees buzzing around the bottle seemed to like all the flavors. When they entered the big hall, Jean-Jacques and Freda stood in amazement. The crowds of people reminded Jean-Jacques of the ants that would scurry about whenever he accidentally stepped on an anthill. The people seemed to swirl around in circles, carrying heavy bags and baskets on their head and in their hands. This happened at the local market near Jean-Jacques and Freda's home, too, but they had never seen so many people in one place. Freda decided there were more people in this market than on the entire mountainside where she and Jean-Jacques lived. Mrs. Pierre walked the children to the fruit vendor. On his table were mounds of yellow mangos speckled with brown spots to say they were the sweetest. And there were bunches of bananas, clusters of quinepes, and piles of cherimoyas and soursops. "Mr. Joseph, these are my godchildren, Jean-Jacques and Freda," Mrs. Pierre said. "Bonjour," said Jean-Jacques and Freda, greeting Mr. Joseph in the way their mother had taught them. "Bonjour, children," Mr. Joseph responded. "How are you today?" "Oh, we're very well," Jean-Jacques spoke up. "Marin has brought us to see the Iron Market." "I have to meet with some of the Macans at the market," Mrs. Pierre said to Mr. Joseph. "While I'm speaking with the vendors, would you please be able to keep an eye on Jean-Jacques and Freda, please?" Then Mrs. Pierre added, "They will be very good and mind their manners, won't you, children?" "Oh, yes, Marin, we promise," Freda answered. Jean-Jacques nodded in agreement. Mr. Joseph smiled and said that of course he would like to help, and Mrs. Pierre walked away into the big crowd of people. Jean-Jacques and Frida felt a little curious about all the things she would see. They silently wished they could see too. "Do you like canapes?" Mr. Joseph asked, holding a cluster of the plump green fruit. "Oh, yes," Janak said eagerly. He could feel his mouth water at the thought of popping open the thick green skin and chewing off the tart orange flesh. Canapes were one of his favorite treats. "But we don't have any money to buy them," Frida said. "Our elders say," Mr. Joseph responded, breaking off a generous cluster of canapes for each child, "he who doesn't eat alone never knows hunger." Jean-Jacques and Frida quietly ate their canapes, taking in the busy movements of the merchants. In long rows up and down the aisles, the vendors had set up their stalls of goods to sell. The children could hear the adults bargaining with the vendors for the best price. Everyone sounded serious, but Freda and Jean-Jacques knew it was more like a game between the grown-ups and the Machans. Mr. Joseph noticed how Freda and Jean-Jacques studied all the vendors. "Would you like to meet some of the other vendors?" he asked. "Do you think it would be okay?" Frida asked, looking at all the people. "Oh, yes, go and enjoy yourselves," Mr. Joseph said. "But don't go too far. I promised Mrs. Pierre that I would keep my eye on you." Freda and Jean-Jacques leapt to their feet and walked eagerly down the corridor, as they felt as if everything they could imagine was right here in this one aisle. There was a man selling brooms, buckets, and other items for the home. There was an artisan selling his beautiful carvings from old pieces of metal. Another stand, Janot carefully studied the little cars made from old jugs, cans, and bottles. The toy vendor even had fancy toy cars and beautiful dolls brought in from other countries. What caught Frida's eye was the clothing machan. Hanging side by side, the colors of the dresses looked like a rainbow stretching over the mountains after a strong rain. But what Frida really wanted to see were the stacks of pretty mushwas. Frida loved to wrap her head in her grandmother's scarves and pretend she was all grown up heading to the market on her own. Sitting on top of the stack of mushwas was a beautiful satin red scarf filled with patterns of blue and pink paisleys. How this would sparkle on her grandmother's head. "Gran's birthday is tomorrow," Frida whispered. "Wouldn't she look so pretty in this scarf?" "Have you forgotten, Frida? We don't have any money to buy the scarf," Jean-Jacques said. "I know," Frida sighed, reaching out her hand to stroke the beautiful mouchoir. "I was just thinking." "Don't touch!" a gruff voice answered from behind the piles of clothing. "Children always have such sticky fingers, and they ruin my things." The clothing mashwan gave a stern look to Frida and Jean-Jacques. Frida quickly pulled her hand back and kept it at her side. She hadn't done anything wrong, she thought. She was just going to take a closer look. "I'm sorry," Frida answered. "I didn't mean to be rude. I only wanted to." Just then, a loud noise came from the entrance. Frida and Jean-Jacques could hear the baying of a goat before they saw him turn and run down the aisle where they stood. The goat had a long rope trailing along the ground. Not far behind came a farmer, running after the goat. "Stop!" he shouted. "Come back!" The goat was most definitely not listening to the farmer. The farmer grabbed the end of the rope, but the goat managed to sidestep quickly in another attempt to escape. As the goat jumped away from the farmer, he bumped the table across the clothing vendor, spilling rice and beans and ground cornmeal that were for sale. The farmer slipped in the rice kernels, beans, and cornmeal powder that would made a delightful dish of beans of my myloon with bean sauce. The farmer struggled to regain his balance. He pulled some of the stacks of the clothing and they went toppling down with him. The goat saw his chance, zigzagging and running away with the farmer close behind him. Jean-Jacques and Frida could not help but giggle at the silly scene. Nothing this exciting ever happened in La Cour where they lived. "Are you okay, Mrs. Jean?" Mr. Joseph had come over to help the clothing vendor, who looked very flustered. "The goat stepped all over this dress," Mrs. Jean wailed. "How can I sell a dirty dress?" "It's okay, Mrs. Jean," Frida spoke up. "We'll help you." "Help me?" Mrs. Jean responded, raising an eyebrow. "How can two children possibly help me?" But Frida had already left, pulling Jean-Jacques along. "What are you up to?" Jean-Jacques asked. He had seen that look on Frida's face before. He knew that once his cousin made up her mind, there was no changing it. Frida walked over to the broom vendor and asked if she could please borrow a broom. Frida turned to Jean-Jacques and handed the broom to him. "You can help by sweeping up the food that fell so nobody else will slip like the farmer did," Frida said. "Now, if I could only help Mrs. Jean clean her dress." Jean-Jacques pointed out the soap vendor, who was at the end of the corridor. "Why don't you go ask her if you can have a little soap?" he said. Then Frida noticed the soap vendor also had a plastic bucket next to her. "I wonder if we can borrow her bucket," Frida thought. By the time Frida had returned with the plastic bucket, water, and a tiny piece of soap, Jean-Jacques had already swept up the rice, beans, and the cornmeal. Now he was helping Mrs. Jean with rearranging the stacks of clothing. Frida carefully picked up the pink dress and dabbed a little water on the dirty spot where the goat had trampled the fabric. Rubbing soap on the dirt, Frida began to wash the dress, just like her mother had taught her, down by the stream where they would go on wash day. Back and forth, she gently worked the fabric until the dirt was all gone. The dress looked like new. "Here, Mrs. Jean," Frida said. "Your dress isn't dirty anymore, and now you can sell it." Then she added, "Well, you might want to wait for it to dry first." Mrs. Jean smiled broadly. "Thank you, child." Then she pursed her lips and asked, "Why did you go through so much trouble for an old lady like me? You don't even know me." Frida spoke up. "We didn't do it by ourselves. The broom vendor, the soap vendor, the man by the water pump, they all helped. It's like our Marin taught us. Many hands make light work." Mrs. Jean looked at Frida and Jean-Jacques. "Why were you so interested in that red scarf earlier?" Jean-Jacques answered shyly, "Tomorrow is my grand's birthday, and we thought it would look pretty on her head. But we know we don't have money to buy it. We were just looking." Mrs. Jean paused a moment and picked up the mouchoir. "There's another saying from our elders. The spoon goes to the house of the bowl, and the bowl must also go to the house of the spoon." "We must help those who help us," she said. "Take this to your grandmother and tell her that Mrs. Jean from the Iron Market said that she should be very proud of her grandchildren." Frida jumped up and down. "Really?" she said. "Merci." Thank you very much," Jean-Jacques replied, taking the mouchoir. Then he paused with a worried look on his face. We didn't help you so that you would give us the scarf. I think you should keep it so you can sell it." "That, my child," Mrs. Jean said, "is exactly why you must accept it. This is a gift to say thank you." Then she added, "And perhaps to also say I'm sorry. I should have spoken to you more kindly when you first approached me." Just then, Mrs. Pierre returned. "Have you been good, my children?" she asked. Mr. Joseph walked over and answered, "They were a big help. You may bring your godchildren to visit any time you like, Mrs. Pierre." Yes, anytime, Mrs. Jean echoed. As they took Mrs. Pierre by the hand, the children waved goodbye to their new friend. Apita! They shouted. See you later! The vendors responded. Bah! Rang out of the distance, and everyone laughed. Okay, so that is the end of our story. I hope you